So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brooks, Abby, and Shannon to the floor, to the screen, and to the stage. Welcome, Elate team.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here today. We're looking forward to the conversation. I feel like we've met with and engaged with folks from this community for years now. I think we first met Clara back in 2021, and so it's been wonderful just to see this community grow and how it's thrived over the years. But my name is Brooks. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Elate. I'm going to be joined by and will allow two of the other team members here from our side to introduce themselves. But we're really looking forward to, again, the conversation because, as we all know, AI is everywhere. It's top of mind for so many organizations right now. And I think for every individual, they're thinking, how is AI going to be a part of what my role looks like going forward? What is the future of AI for my given area of the organization? Where we want to focus today's time is the role of AI in strategic planning. Not only is this likely a topic that is top of mind for folks here going into 2026, and this being in the heart of when so many organizations are thinking about next year's planning cycles, it's also top of mind because I think, again, for folks that sit in the chief of staff role, it is often tasked to them to take things from 0 to 1. AI for a lot of organizations is that exact thing, which is we don't do it today or we don't do it well and consistently. So how do we start to think about the ways that we incorporate AI? And we're going to focus the conversation in our realm and area of expertise, which is strategic planning and strategy execution. So as we get into the discussion here today, I've already introduced myself, but Abby, Shannon, do you all mind just quick introductions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start and then Shannon, let you round us out. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you guys. My name's Abby Parker. I'm one of the other co-founders here at Elate and serve as our COO. Have served in a lot of different operations capacities in the past and just frankly eat, sleep, breathe ops as well as strategic planning. So excited for the conversation here today and hopefully some thoughtful Q&A at the end.
Yeah, and to round us out, I'm Shannon Keaty. I'm the Director of Solutions Consulting. I support our customers on the pre-sale and post-sale side of things, all from the lens of strategy, consulting, and execution coaching as well. So I really, really try and get into the nuts and bolts on how to make things happen and have it happen in a way that is efficient, effective, and good for everyone on board. So that's the lens in which I'll be speaking to today is a lot of what we're hearing and seeing from our customers and other conversations within the AI space.
Wonderful. And while we know a lot of the folks in this community, and hopefully a lot of the folks you're aware of and familiar with Elate, what is usually helpful in these kind of settings is just giving a little bit of background as to why we're so passionate about strategic planning and strategy execution, and how the experiences we had firsthand, all three of us on today's call, help shape the direction and the path that we set on as an organization. And so to kind of go through that, we're going to start with that introduction, then go the macro. What are we seeing in the AI space? How is that then translating specifically into strategic planning and getting to the practicality of this? What AI use cases are we seeing across the organizations that we partner with, chiefs of staff within these organizations as well? So that all being shared, for those that are not familiar, Elate was born out of pain that we had felt firsthand as strategy and operations leaders at past organizations. I myself, being with organizations as large as Salesforce and SAP, down to a 5-person startup that I had helped scale to a couple hundred folks. And just time and time again, seeing the disconnect that so often occurs as organizations look to bring together long-term vision with tactical execution. Oftentimes, when we think about the pains that are attributed towards this, you see organizations struggling with siloed work, employees themselves not necessarily understanding how they are connected to other parts of the organization, how one objective or initiative or rock being off track has implications across the rest of the organization, and how those implications then tie into the operating plan that we're trying to achieve and drive towards collectively as a company. The next bucket is then misaligned priorities. We hear so often that our leadership team wants employees to go faster, to produce more work, to be more efficient in leveraging AI, but oftentimes it's met with move faster at what? Where are the areas of focus that you want us to have as an employee? Because it's not as though we're unwilling to say yes to those. We just simply don't know what the priorities are. We don't have a clear line of sight into these being the imperatives that really do move the business forward. And so how do we start to give that unified view that brings together the strategic direction within the execution that employees can take on, and then reactive decisions. So often we hear that organizations are looking in the rearview mirror for how they make decisions, how they review data, how they do reporting. And we want to shift the static reactive nature to what most organizations operate under within their normal operating rhythm, and instead start to think about that as a more proactive process. How do we take a strategic plan that oftentimes never leaves the shelves or a binder, it collects dust, and instead making a living, breathing guide to how we ultimately reach those outcomes that we're driving towards as a business itself. So that's why we built Elate, was to bring this together in a unified way. Where we come into play is we believe it is people, process, and then a solution, the technology itself. So we want to be a holistic partner in how we come alongside those different organizations to drive strategy execution. And the thing we're most excited about is that we've been on this journey now for about 6 years. And for the first time, really since we had the idea for Elate, the technology itself is unlocking and shattering so many expectations that I think organizations have as it relates to strategic planning. So often we heard, even from early investors, strategic planning is just a human process. You got to know the context of the business. You got to have the ins and the outs. You got to know the intricacies of it to really shape a strategy as you go forward. And I think what we've all seen with AI is that we now have a thought partner that really buoys the way in which we build our strategy, execute it, but have pressure tests, have gap analysis that are running at all times, really evaluating and guiding the way that we build a strategy, but more importantly, deliver on that. And so as we think about kind of the holistic changes at a macro level with AI, this is where I'll turn it over to Shannon to kind of speak through those, because that's going to shape, again, directionally where we want to take today's conversation and the application we're seeing with AI in strategic planning and strategy execution.
Yeah. Thanks, Brooks. So as I mentioned, my day-to-day is spent supporting our customers and coming alongside them in their strategic execution, finding ways to create alignment or reduce friction in any way, shape, or form. And through those conversations with our customers, we started to hear a lot of similar themes around the way in which they were exploring AI. And so we took that internally and tasked ourselves as kind of some of the leaders at our company to really dig into what AI's level playing field is in strategy right now and how we can build off of that. Now, I know the attendance here, probably there's a wide range as far as people's level of understanding and comfortability with AI. So I wanted to take a moment to kind of walk everybody through some of the macro trends that we're all seeing, both at an Elate level, but also just across AI in general. So I'll start over on the left side of the screen with the macro trends in AI. And it's important to call out that we, in the last 18 months, have seen a greater catalyst in AI development and deployment than we have over the last decade. So things are moving quick and they're moving fast, and that can be overwhelming to people. However, I think when you think about it, it started as experiments in content creation, and then that trickled over into business operations and forecasting and scenario modeling, whereas now enterprises are no longer asking if they'll use AI and what of these isolated categories will they be applicable, but rather thinking about them in a much bigger, wider scale. So they're not finite, specific activities anymore. While that is still applicable, those are kind of absorbed and assumed at this point. Now people are really trying to think about how it's going to impact their businesses on a wider scale. I think that's important to also know that the speed of learning is overtaking the scale, and therefore it's impacting its competitive advantage. So organizations who are moving faster aren't necessarily the biggest. And so now they're iterating and experimenting and learning quickly how AI reshapes their processes. And so as you keep up with your expectation that your teams understand and know how to implement AI, we know that being able to be iterative is more important than just having AI there and it be very broadly applied. And then also, AI capabilities are no longer limited to data science teams. I know that that might seem kind of obvious to everyone, but I think there's also this affirmation that we want to share with our teams that it's not just somebody that has a really extensive tech background that is able to understand and leverage and utilize AI to its greatest capacities. And so I share that to indicate that, business users now are including strategy, finance, operations leaders across all of these different departments that all have direct access to these now AI tools to model scenarios, identify risks, adapt plans in real time. All of these things are now accessible, whereas previously AI was a lot more linear in the way that it was thought about and approached. So as we transition from the left side of the screen over to the right side of the screen, I want to leave you with this idea that the takeaway is that AI is moving from being more of a productivity tool to now being a strategic enabler. And it's not just about doing tasks faster, it's also about making better, faster, and more strategic decisions. And we're going to get into some of the details on how that looks here on the next slide, but really sharing that there is an opportunity for strategy leaders to step in and utilize AI, which previously I think some people might have counted themselves out as how this can overlap with some of your functional work.
Perfect. Kind of building on a lot of what Shannon just shared, one of the things that I think as chiefs of staff, we often kind of categorize ourselves as is generalists, which is very true. You have to know a lot of things about a lot of things. But at the same time, there is actually a specific niche that I think chiefs of staff fill in that you all have context that is very, very specific to your industry, to your organizations. And frankly, it's a level of knowledge that typically very few people outside of your role actually hold. And so as we look at the next slide, one of the things that we like to talk about is specifically talking about domain-specific AI. So what we mean by that term is AI that is specifically tailored towards the problem set that you're solving. There's a number of tools out there. There's truly dozens for each individual industry. But when we think about strategy, one of the things that we often see is that strategy and operations tends to not get tailored too much because the expectation is like you're a generalist, so just use the generic tools. But the reality is we actually do need a specific subset of tools, and in the context of AI, a specific subset of an LLM that actually allows us to do the work that we need with as efficiently as possible. I don't think that this would be news to anyone on the call that your calendars are probably very chaotic and busy and constantly changing. And so we need to figure out how we best leverage AI in a way that is efficient for us and can get us the results that we need. As I was looking through the chat at some of the problems that you guys would love to solve, which is one, if you could only solve one thing, a lot of it is talking around that efficiency piece. So when we think about why we personally feel that domain-specific AI, or in this case, strategy-specific AI, is important, is first and foremost because that precision that it applies based off of knowing things about your industry or knowing things about your specific data set that you're working with is incredibly important in terms of what are the outcomes or the results that you actually get from AI in that. You can spend a lot of time trying to train a very generic LLM to give you the results that you want, but it's very, very time consuming. And at the end of the day, those are constantly changing. And so we want to be really specific in the lens in which the AI is actually providing outcomes back to you to make sure that they're both more accurate, but also more actionable, right? You don't have to go back and forth with like 8 different prompts. We want that to be more specific. The second piece, though, that we see with this is also leading to the faster adoption piece. So this goes to the earlier point around like less time teaching the model itself. But I also think it's around making sure it's solving the right sets of problems that you all specifically face in your roles. And again, chiefs of staff do have to be generalists at a lot of things, but I would also say it's a very, very specific role, typically in terms of the type of people who can fill that role are even very specific. And so we want that really, really tailored to that. The last piece is probably on everyone's mind. I think goes without saying, but I do want to call it out, is when we think about the roles of a chief of staff, often you are dealing with some of the most sensitive data in the organization. You have access to a lot, as you should and as you need. But we have to be very careful with what we do with that information and make sure that we're getting the recommendations that we need in a safe, secure, and compliant way. Guessing most of your orgs are like ours, where that is just top of mind, especially when it comes with AI specifically. And so wanting to make sure that we're always leveraging AI in a way that actually aligns to your organization's data standards, as well as making sure we can balance how do we quickly innovate, to Shannon's point earlier, with how do we also maintain control in terms of making sure that we're not training a model on our company's specific information that would be proprietary that we don't want shared elsewhere. So as we think about yes, AI is everywhere. Yes, it very much is applicable to strategy and ops and specifically chiefs of staff. but how we use it really matters. These are some of the things that we keep in mind as we started to think about what are the main problem areas then that we would want to solve for. And there are a million things that, as chiefs of staff, you all have on your plate on a day-to-day basis. When we started thinking about this problem set, what we try to do is talk to as many folks like yourself as possible to say, okay, asking this exact question, what is the one thing that you wish you could solve? If you could only solve one, what's the top priority? We really bucketed this in three main areas that we're going to speak to here in a moment. First and foremost, all around reporting. How do we get the right information to our leaders at the right time and in the right manner? I think everyone is likely worked with a number of different leaders. Everyone likes to receive that information a little differently. So how do we make sure that we're getting that right information in, that they're not getting lost too in the weeds, but they're also not staying so high level that they don't see some of the challenges or problem areas below? The second piece that we'll speak to is all around, okay, as risks emerge, how do we actually know about those? How do we stay proactive, not reactive? And then lastly, we'll speak to kind of the planning cycle as a whole and how do you take people who are working in however many different systems, Excel, et cetera, and bring all that together. But what I'd love to speak to first is I would say the largest pain point we heard from the folks that we were talking to is all around driving reporting. I don't know if this resonates. I imagine it does with some of you at least. But the number of folks we had share with us about their hundreds plus page slide decks that they put together, either on a monthly basis or QBR, I'm literally seeing some laughs in people's videos. It sounds absurd, but it is just all too relatable. Was something we couldn't ignore. Folks were just bringing up time and time again, like, oh my gosh, can't even imagine what we put together. And inevitably, we ask leaders for these, 3 weeks ahead of time, but let's be honest, they get to it 24 hours ahead of time. We're trying to bring everything together. And frankly, just the amount of time alone put on PowerPoints that then are static and out of date within 24 hours later is very shocking. And I think we all can name, like, that doesn't sound efficient. And yet, our execs still need reporting. So both of those are true. We have to do it. And also, it's incredibly time consuming. So that was our first area of focus. And I would say an area of focus for you all to take as kind of a leave behind after this is really leveraging AI to think about how can we report better and in the right way. And so within the Elate platform itself, that comes in the way of what we call reporting assistant. It's all around how do we take all of the information we have across our various, in this case with strategic planning, like objectives or rocks, whatever your nomenclature is internally. How do we bring that information together in a way that actually consolidates not just the data, but starts to specifically create summaries that are going to be surfacing the most important pieces to an exec or leadership team? Uh, a lot of times this comes in the way of not just what content do we include, but also like what's the tone in which we deliver this. Different executives or even just different leadership levels need some of that adjustment to make sure that it's being received best. And the reality is we want to marry the data side of things, the graphs, with the story component and that the verbiage assigned to that. But we also don't want to put the burden on leaders to have to go think through all that, type it out, and then everyone reformat in 8 different ways. And so when we've rolled this out with specific organizations that are focusing on the reporting side of things, the biggest thing we saw was not only did it help from a reporting time savings perspective, but it actually shifted the executive team meetings kind of operating cadence internally for that. And one of the things that they had spent a lot of time on was going through what are the updates to all these. So everyone would pull up their slide. Inevitably, the other 12 people in the room would zone out because it's not about them right now. They'd go through their outcomes and say, this is where we're at. Maybe a couple questions would be asked, and then they'd move on to the next one. That information is really valuable, and we don't want to discard that. But when you think about 13 executives in a room, that's a very, very expensive meeting. And what they were leaving behind was they weren't getting to the point where they started to talk about how do we actually move the needle on the things that are at risk or behind. And so for the team that we leveraged, or the team that we had worked with on the reporting assistant side, their biggest shift came in this aha moment of, wait, we don't actually need to be going through the status updates. We should get that ahead of time. We should actually be talking about the areas of risk and opportunity, as well as reducing the hours that folks are putting into this report. And so as we think about how AI can leverage even something as simple as whether that's a biweekly, monthly, whatever your leadership team cadence meeting is, there's usually a lot of agenda topics to cover in a very short amount of time. How do you maximize that time to actually get the most of it, to allow people to read things ahead of time, know where things are at, and not necessarily spend all of your time saying, here's where we're at on, these 5 things and have everybody else check out. So with reporting assistant in particular, that is one that I personally am very passionate about, just because all I see is like dollars and cents when I think about those meetings and I think about the time putting together those PowerPoints. And also, frankly, PowerPoints we're presenting for one right now. They're both beautiful, but they can also be used as a crutch. And so how do we leverage that in the right way?
Yeah, I think also one thing I want to jump in and make sure I emphasize too is that a lot of times the criticism that we're hearing around AI and its usage in these kinds of functions is that it takes the human element out of it. Like, you all are the experts, you are the ones that know the ins and outs of the business, the various leaders. You are the keeper of that information, and AI isn't going to be able to replace that. Rather, we're looking at this as a lens of being able to take out that first attempt of the draft or the actual big like effort that it takes to create and generate a report that ultimately goes out, whether that's up to an executive level or down to your L2 level. This is really, we mentioned at the beginning of the call, a thought partner. You all tend to work in islands, right? You don't typically have a lot of extra hands around. And so this really is supposed to be that first layer of the work. And then there's a lot of opportunity to be able to come in, not just customize the prompts to make it sound the way that you want, but actually to be able to come back in and edit and refine on your own as well. So I want to make sure that I emphasize that, because I know that that's one of the big concerns around AI. And I'm sure a lot of you all would be very, very hesitant to leverage a report that AI generated that you didn't have any oversight in. So I just want to like put a big emphasis on that component. This is really that first draft.
Building off of what Abby and Shannon have both spoken to already around reporting assistant and having a thought partner who's helping to create these reports, and staying with that theme itself, one of the other things that we really oriented Strategy Advisor with, and we'd encourage anyone to think of AI in this vein, is leaning into what makes strategy and chiefs of staff great. For us, one of the things we see so consistently is that a great chief of staff, a great strategy leader, is able to ask the right question. That is a superpower of theirs, which is identifying what is the question truly to be asked here, or even presenting the question in a way that drives a collective alignment and collaboration. Even if those are difficult questions that other folks might feel uncomfortable asking, it is that superpower that so often unlocks how an organization goes to the next level from where they're at today. For us, the way that we wanted to really bring this to life was in a feature called Risk Navigator. So again, think of this in the vein of the thought partner, but something that's helping to see around corners. For us, one of the things that AI can do is take a lot of information and a lot of noise and really identify the mission critical signals that we need to be concerned about. Time and time again, when organizations put a strategic plan in place, one of the most difficult pieces of that is making sure that they are keeping line of sight into the things that matter most versus the things that are urgent in a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. That's where we really want to create more of a, as I spoke to at the beginning, proactive approach to identifying risk and surfacing those to a leadership team for intervention. So many organizations struggle with where they see their executive team time, their meetings gravitate towards is whatever is fire is burning brightest in that moment. And what we care about is really giving context, weighting objectives, outcomes, the things that are high priority. Full stop. These are the high priorities that we need to always ensure we have line of sight into. And then we can add in maybe some urgent matters that need to be addressed this week itself. But for us, this is what Risk Navigator helps to do. It takes a lot of information, connecting integrations from tools like Salesforce, HubSpot, Jira, Asana, Smartsheet, ensuring that we have work streams or outcomes connected into our strategy, but then also ensuring that we understand how our strategy is being executed across the organization. And when we have that all within a unified view, not spreadsheets, not silos, a unified view, now what we're able to unlock is that ability to see around corners, is the ability to ask those right questions, spot risk earlier, to make sure that they're then being brought to the leadership team. So the reporting element and mechanism is often what delivers the risk itself that we're discussing, but there has to be an engine powering those reports. If it is static, if it's something built on individuals dropping in an update the night before with really no context or no connection into data itself, it's going to be a reactive process. So the example that we have worked with, 1,200 person company, they're in the software space. They noticed a product delay. And we all know the implications to a product or a feature being delayed. But oftentimes, one of the things that doesn't get accounted for or adjusted is how our operating plan tied in that product feature. When we say yes to building, as an example, a new product, even internally at Elate, we always ask, how will this move the needle? Is it going to increase our contract value? Is it going to allow us to enter into a new enterprise space, as an example? Is it going to allow us to increase our stickiness within our customer base? That outcome is what is built off of the idea of saying yes to, in this case, launching a new product feature. When that is delayed, we need to really be able to contextualize what does that mean to our plan, our ability to hit our plan. Because if we were expecting that this new product feature was going to increase our contract values going to market, and now we realize that's not going to go to live for another 2 months. How do we account for that in other areas of the business? That's what we want to call and surface and really track decisions. So often we hear organizations really struggle to understand the value of a decision. What changed when we surfaced this level of information and ultimately drove a decision based off of that information being surfaced? And that's really an important piece that we want to tie in and introduce here.
Yeah, I think this was something that got me really excited. So, for a little bit of context, in a past life, I worked the DC circuit. So, I know there are a couple of DC and DMV people in the audience. So, cheers to us. But one of what made my job very challenging, but also was the value of what I was driving, was being able to provide information to my clients as quickly as possible so that they were in the know and could adjust accordingly. And so, just even now thinking back to those nights and those days, you start to get a little anxious because you're always worried about missing something. You don't want to be the reason that you missed a specific press release or you didn't account for this specific element impacting something. And that would keep me up at night. And so I imagine, again, you all being people that are a lot of the times responsible for being the keepers of that knowledge and also the flag waivers in these scenarios. Something like this, of understanding how AI can be leveraged to notify that of you and almost take the burden off of having to be subscribed to 100 different newsletters and be on the pulse of every single different component that might be impacting one of your business lines, I think opens you up to a lot more to share the capacity with somebody else, or in this case, AI, and be able to spend your time doing something else. So that was really what perked my interest and has kind of been the lens that I've been speaking to people about how to leverage AI. And to Abby's point earlier, the way in which you can do that, and I know there's a couple specific questions in the chat right now, is having something that's domain specific enables you to be able to leverage your current information as much as possible. If you just plug in ChatGPT, some of these things, or I guess I shouldn't single them out, but a general LLM doesn't necessarily guarantee that your risks are identified the way that you want them to be. You don't get as much customization for as little of a lift. So just thought I'd throw that in there of this is incredibly valuable as far as flagging that risk and flagging it quickly and taking that burden off of you.
Yeah, and I see a few questions here. And so before we go any further, I feel like we can kind of bundle these up. It looks like data hygiene, where is this data coming from, to ultimately help drive those decisions. So to that point of creating a foundation, bringing our strategy together in a unified view where folks have visibility and can start to see how their work is tied into directionally where we want to go. That's what our bread and butter is. That's what we cared about. And those were the pains that we felt firsthand. When folks don't have that clear line of sight, it's really hard for them to understand how to say yes to the right initiatives or no to the things that, or not now, to the things that they shouldn't be taking on. At Elate, we create that unified view. We start by importing a strategic plan and allowing that to be mapped appropriately through the organization. We also then connect into data sources. That's what we recommend, right? Pulling in the tools like Salesforce, HubSpot, Jira, even a Google Sheet or Excel Online to make sure that we have that clear alignment around outcomes that we care about driving towards. Even if you leverage a BI tool already for some of that dashboarding, no one comes to us saying we need more data. Even being able to embed BI tools directly into Elate, the kind of essence of it is being able to give context to those dashboards or that data itself, saying, here's the outcome and here's the initiatives or the bets that we're making to ultimately reach those outcomes themselves. when we start to connect those different data sources, when we start to not just have a strategy that is getting a status update, but also then having clear measurables on it, that's where now we start to really be able to proactively drive decisions. All of that information is then also not just showing us, are we delivering on our meeting our results, delivering on our plan? It also is helping to guide and give context to, for us, strategy advisor. And this is where so much of when we talk about hallucination, when we talk about being able to understand what your business truly cares about, flows into our last feature set, which is Plan Analyzer. Think of this as the way in which we can solve two challenges. The first being, how do we take all of those offline documents, conversations, things that were built in our 2026 planning offsite in Excel and Word documents and slides, and allow it to be mapped into a platform that can generate our strategy for the coming year, rather than manually taking all of that and trying to enter it into another spreadsheet or even the Elate platform. We want to auto map that into an immediate, here's the lay of the land. Here is the map of your strategy, where we're actually allowing AI and what we've built to do things like pressure test, to do a gap analysis, to identify objectives that are not connected to themes or potentially duplicative objectives or those that don't have an outcome tied to them. If you've worked with Elate and you're familiar with us, you know we do a lot of that already today on the services side. Shannon and her team lead a lot of those efforts and initiatives. And what we've now done is we've taken years worth of that learning, thousands of strategies that we've seen, hundreds of organizations that we've worked with, and allowed that to help guide the way in which we build our AI agent or AI tool and strategy advisor to not just map the plan into the platform, but more importantly, start to identify where are the gaps, where are the things we should be concerned about. If we have individuals that are over capacity, have too many objectives, how do we identify them before we hit go on our plan itself? And so for us, this is still something that we're very much still testing because we know the importance and the value in which this creates and delivers. Some of those beta users that we were working alongside are seeing the immediate value. It's being able to see all of those documents just upload into the platform, saving countless hours where we're not having to wrangle those documents and manually enter them out somewhere else, but they're also starting to identify, again, those gaps within the plan as it's being mapped. The other thing I will note is that so often we see organizations struggle with consistency to a framework. They don't necessarily use the same vocabulary throughout the organization, or they interchange objectives for initiatives for rocks. And what we want to really use this part of the process for is refining what is our internal culture around how we think about strategy. How do we make sure that folks are using the same vocabulary throughout the organization? Because that does allow this to be a lot stickier and a lot more of a solid foundation that we're building on. So I will say that this piece of it is how we see a lot of organizations now starting to train. They're uploading 5-10 years worth of past decisions, past strategies, to make sure that they're giving the necessary context to, again, a domain-specific AI feature that's built to identify the right risk, built to look for those best practices and learnings that we've now seen for 6+ years in building Elate.
Yeah. And just to get, oh, Abby, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to reference, I think that there was a recent question in the chat that was actually really, really relevant to Brooke, some of what you're mentioning of like those inconsistencies. And someone had asked, like, don't you have to have incredibly clean and organized data in order to start using some sort of, or any really holistic AI solution? And I would say, I think we all in a perfect world want organizations to have incredibly clean and organized data. We have seen thousands of strategic plans, and I can tell you not a single one was incredibly clean and organized. It's just the nature of like our businesses are moving so fast. And I think a lot of times we almost get overwhelmed with like, okay, we've got to go clean all of our data. We know where all the inconsistencies are, that we don't actually know like what are the things that are most important to have organized. And so one of the things that we've seen specifically with leveraging Plan Analyzer with folks is it actually helps to reduce that to say like, hey, we found 5 duplicative objectives. They're all called something different, but they seem to be getting at the same thing. Are these the same? And surfacing those questions to you rather than trying to go clean and organize everything, because I would say that that is a endless effort. Yes, you want to have clean data. I'm not advocating against it, but I will say I've yet to see anyone who has perfected that. And I feel like we will miss out on so much value if we're constantly waiting until our data is clean because let's be honest, we've got other folks in our organization that the moment you clean it, they're going to go make it dirty again. So, Brooks, exactly to your point in the chat, it's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to maybe explore, like live off the cuff too, a way in which I'm thinking about how we're going to continue to adapt our way of leveraging AI, particularly as it relates to Plan Analyzer. I think Christy, at the beginning of the call, one of the things that you tagged in there of like, this would help my life live is if I could, streamline all of these executives' stream of consciousness. And I know many people are starting to leverage AI meeting minute tools to capture and make executive summaries and things like that. And so I would also encourage if you are not doing that to start the conversations internally with your organizations to do that because that is life changing. Just being able to have somebody take meeting minutes and make a summary out of them really quickly is very helpful. But if I think about it from a lens of Plan Analyzer, I think there's also an opportunity to think about how we incorporate something like meeting minutes at those executive level conversations and embed that into a tool like Elate to be able to live tell us where to pivot or where the priorities are or where we need to kind of continue in a different direction to help alleviate some of those competing priorities. So that's just kind of like a live on the cusp way in which I'm like you all are just kind of seeing how my mind thinks about how we can incorporate AI into some of those problems. And so, Christy, I appreciate that prompt because that got me thinking about some of the scenarios that I'm dealing with right now as I navigate competing priorities with some of our customers. So that was really helpful. Thank you. All righty. I'm biased towards your SOP question, Casey, as well. That's something that I spend a lot of time developing and crafting for our customers, as well as our governance and framework documents, which is another fancy way of calling SOPs. Um, and so I think absolutely yes. I think being able to have some of the standardized terminology that and Abby are highlighting is essentially the framework for those SOPs and allows them to actually become standardized. Because what I've seen in practice is someone will set a governance expectation or a cadence requirement related to strategic execution, but because all these different departments and divisions are ultimately actually doing things a little bit differently, there wasn't a central line of standardization. That SOP loses its value and it kind of loses its authority, and people end up starting to do their own spins and twists. And then you won't find that out until they are required to come and report, and then the report functions are completely different. So that is absolutely a real live question. I hope you're not dealing with that in your organization. But if you are, I can help where I can if you're interested.
Yeah, one other thing I saw come in here, and I feel like this is a really important thing as we kind of move and certainly want to open up to other questions as well. I think with every AI feature, and especially the three that we've walked through here, the time savings and efficiency component of this is a must-have, right? And I think that's always been the case with technology and software in general. If we're implementing software, it should be to help drive a lot of efficiency gains. There was a few weeks ago, it's maybe a month now at this point, I was in a conversation with the COO, and their biggest focus when it comes to AI is saying, we know it's going to unlock efficiency. It's going to save our team time and hours and help eliminate a lot of the manual work. And we want to have the onus on our employees to identify where they can see those efficiencies, because where we need them to be shifting towards is then taking action and intervention and really tracking how they identified time savings that then allowed them to allocate their time and the information that was surfaced there to make an impact through the organization, to track the value, so to speak, that AI unlocked in driving a decision and helping to remove a hurdle and doubling down on an area of opportunity. And so it's those unrealized gains that we have where I think oftentimes strategy leaders, chiefs of staff can start to hone in on how do we turn those time savings and efficiency into measurable impact and outcomes through our organization. But for us, and again, we're very biased here, the most clear way to track impact is in how did we do as it relates to executing our strategy itself? Where are we tracking the moments in time where we either persisted and continued down a path of saying these are the objectives we've set out and need to accomplish versus being able to identify when the pivot is needed, when we need to either sunset an initial OKR or rock that no longer is needed, and instead invest into other areas and ensure we do have alignment and visibility into not just the decision itself, but why is the decision made and why is this the new course of action? And so, that is the piece that I think is really going to be in large part like the onus on strategy and operations teams to capture to help facilitate the way in which they're incorporating AI into their organizations, which kind of sets us up here nicely, maybe to at least put a little bit of a bow on the presentation itself and open it up to questions.
Yeah, I can bring us home here. Really what we want to leave you all with is this acknowledgement that AI is accelerating and you all should absolutely feel called to understand it as best as you can. Take that in little bites as much as you can, or dive head in. I think there's also a spectrum to the way in which you seek to understand it. But I do want to throw that flag out there that if you feel like you're lagging behind, you still have time, and I would implore you to explore. Also, that strategy specific AI or this domain specific AI that we've been talking about will only further empower you all specifically as strategy leaders. And obviously, we're biased as Elate is developing our own domain specific AI component. I would be remiss to not say that there are ways to tackle all of these things outside of that. However, acknowledging that you will get the best bang for your buck if you start to think about the tool in which you're leveraging, being able to really pull specifically from your data and your historic data in a safe, secure way. And that I think is a good conclusion on Strategy Advisor is ultimately a really strong way to put your company in a way in which you're leveraging AI, having safeguards around it, and also being able to keep yourselves at the center of those conversations.
And to maybe immediately jump into the questions, because I think what Shannon was just speaking to here, and Nia, feel free to interrupt us or to surface the right questions that we might miss. But I saw in here one note uh, around basically saying, hey, isn't the chief of staff role basically to keep us aligned? Why do we need to pay for a tool or solution to do this? And I think my immediate reaction comes to mind with often the chief of staff to this point, I think in the journey of it has had to operate on an island and by themselves because that is the role in which they are kind of given, which is to work across the leadership team, make sure that these teams are staying aligned, communicating, collaborating, and there's not a lot of thought partnership that goes into that. I think that's what often now we are starting to think of AI as, which is that thought partner, someone that they can use as a sounding board to see around blind spots or to see blind spots and around corners. But the other piece of this question, I would just simply frame it as is they likely have a CRO at the organization who has a sales team who's driving results and revenue. And when that CRO comes and says, hey, I need sales off because it's going to make me more efficient than using HubSpot or using X, Y, or Z product, oftentimes the efficiency gains are the clear deliverable or the clear reason in which, okay, yeah, we can't just do outbound process where we're sending a million emails nowadays and just fingers crossed hoping that they're going to get through. There's new technology that makes it a lot more efficient than the old ways of doing things. And I think the same can be applied for strategy and operations and a chief of staff, which is, yeah, we used to have to use spreadsheets and PowerPoint, but there's a lot more time savings that can now be incorporated. And again, this gets back to the onset where we're so excited, which is AI shatters the expectation that this is a solo game, an individual sport at this point. Strategic planning isn't. Like there's a way in which we can now shape AI with 10 years worth of past strategic decisions that an organization has made to recall what those past priorities have been, what decisions have been made that shape the future discourse and decisions that we implement as an organization. So again, AI can have more data and more context than frankly a lot of employees are going to have at organizations if leveraged correctly. So that is probably the way in which I'd frame that internally to that individual as well.
Thanks for answering one of our spicy questions, Brooks. I have another question for you here that's been upvoted. based off of who you all work with, we have a lot of chief of staffs here in organizations who are constantly assessing different AI tools. And so, well, how do you know if you're ready for Elate? What's the stage of business? Tell us a little bit more about the types of organizations you work with.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take it. And then Shannon or Abby, feel free to dive into this as well. So we talked a little bit about this at the onset of right people in the position with the right process, then a solution to amplify it. We typically are not encouraging if the organization has 20 or 30 employees and it's just utter chaos, it's startup mode, probably not the right fit for a solution because I think at that stage, you're still developing a lot of the internal muscle, the internal process that's going to need to be scaled over time. Where our sweet spot and the type of organization that we work with is the right people who have started to see the process that they're implementing gain success, but it's not scalable. It's probably a manual process done in Excel, done through just sheer will, bringing into existence what type of information needs to be shared with the rest of the executive leadership team. And Elate often will come alongside as a partner, not just to, again, serve as a sounding board and helping to add to that process and structure, but really then adding fuel to the fire by introducing AI, introducing technology to just streamline and expedite a lot of what is the manual process today for how a business runs and operates. Where again, that the next iteration comes is we now have a really efficient process. We're seeing the gains of reports being auto-generated and created, these summaries that we can always edit and adjust being exec ready and how they're created. But now we want to start to track decisions. We want to start to, again, shift towards more of that proactive approach to implementing and executing upon our strategy so that we have control of our future. We have something that serves, again, as a way in which we can see a yellow flag notified of, look, the projections we have from Q3 are way higher than what we've traditionally been able to do in the past. How do we make sure that we're supporting these different initiatives or these operating plans that we're putting in place? So again, Abby, Shannon, you all see just as many customers coming through the doors. Would love to hear anything you might have.
I would definitely echo a lot of that, Brooks. And I actually saw Nicole, you put this context in the chat that I loved, which is it's somewhat subjective here, but you mentioned that you started to notice that the executive leadership team was spending a significant amount of time on just like status updates and alignment meetings, and you started to see that spin. I think for a lot of organizations, it's when you start feeling like you're spending more time herding cats than actually like understanding where you're trying to go and acting towards that. And I think, Brooks, to your point, a lot of times you have the right people there. You trust your leadership team. You're like, okay, we've got the leaders. We know what we need to do, but it's incredibly inefficient to actually go do it. And I can't keep tabs on where things are at. That to me is often an indicator or kind of big pain point that we see customers coming in with, which is like, I am one human hurting at this point, 30 plus cats. And like we're not actually making the movement or the progress that we're needing. So I would say, Nicole, one, I think that was a great call out. And yeah, just to add to that, you all know not just your time, but your executives' time and where it's being spent. And when you can start to see that drifting into areas that are way too tactical and not strategic, that's a good time.
I do want to take us, there's one question going back to, the inputs and the data organization of things. What is the depth of training that is necessary for an individual organization? And Claire, I know this is a question that you asked, so please help me if I'm not asking this correctly. I want to make sure I honor this question too. What depth of training is necessary for an individual organization on how your data associates to the risks your business carries?
Yeah, I can start us off on that piece. So I think um, when we think about the depth and level of training, it's always going to be evolving, right? And we talked to this earlier with like the data side cleanliness piece to begin with is like it won't be perfect. Um, I would say don't expect it to ever probably be there. But I think one of the most important pieces is making sure you can give it as much context as possible. Brooks was talking about this, but a lot of times that can be like past board decks. It could be past whatever, any form of documents. But I think a lot of times they come in the way of like spreadsheets, PowerPoints, etc., where this has been documented and they probably have names like V572 final, whatever. Like those are the types of things to upload because you'd be shocked at how much context really lives within those. They don't need to be organized. They don't need to be formatted in the exact same way to, I think, get the and extract the ultimate value. It's one of the benefits of AI is that it can do a lot of that thinking for us in a way that would take us a lot more time. Um, so I would say it's probably less than you think. That's not to say it's none, but I think this is where we do encourage folks to think more on like domain specific tools, or in this case, like strategy specific tools that already know what to look for and you're not having to prompt as much. There are a lot of prompts you can certainly give to an LLM to try to equip it with that, so long as you're making sure your LLM is secure in terms of what data you're about to give it. So asterisk caveat there. But I think the biggest thing is making sure that whatever tool you are leveraging, it is looking at it from the lens of strategy specific. So that would be kind of my initial take on that piece. Shannon, curious if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think I would have a follow-up question. I think to Claire, if you're comfortable, or I guess we can just riff off of it, is I'm curious if when you say, if you're asking about the level of training, if you're talking about the training on the LLM from a data side, or if you're talking about from the personnel side of things, and the training that it takes to leverage it. Could you clarify a little bit?
Yeah, I was thinking about the training on the LLM side. Everything I understand about Elate is that it's like a pretty user-friendly tool. It didn't seem like there's a huge amount of like individual training, like user training. I was thinking more about like in the context of my business, like I work at a boutique consultancy with a certain kind of like certain forces that are happening in the market, certain values, certain like a certain whatever capital structure, things like that. And all of those can be discrete inputs. When I think about trying to use an AI model for strategy development, I just think of all of the things that like there's just all these nuances that are really hard to capture. And thinking about how many inputs you would have to use to like train a model to effectively like represent your business or your leadership team or whatever it may be to like to really add a ton of value. Like that's the place where it's kind of breaking my brain a little bit, how I take everything that's in my head and try to put it into a model.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my own personal prompts right now where it's like, consider this and this and this and this, and you're trying to account for every single variable that would potentially be impacting what the ultimate result would be. So that resonates deeply with me. I think my answer, and I'll defer to my colleagues as well on if they have a challenge to it, is that right now, at least, the sentiment is that it's a twofold component, which is we as the users still do bear a decent burden as far as accounting for those elements to make sure that they haven't been neglected or not thought of, not just in the prompt itself, but just even in the language or the terminology or things like that. But the positive is I think that over time and very quickly, that burden is going to lessen because we're learning more about the way in which we can tailor the LLMs, not like through prompts, but like actually through domain specificity here, us training our own Elate specific model to get all of your documents in that initial upload. And then we taught it on the back end to account for every single variable that you're floating in your mind. So I think that is the direction in which I am pushing our teams to consider and how it's being structured to take out the burden of holding that prompt components. But candidly, right now, there is still a balance between that.
And thank you so much, Shannon, Abby, and Brooks. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end with 2 minutes left. So on that note, I wanted to say on behalf of Ask a Chief of Staff, thank you so much to Shannon, Abby, and Brooks, the wonderful Elate team for hosting today's workshop. And with that said, I think, Brooks, you do have a fun announcement for us here.
Yeah, we do. So we actually are publicly launching Strategy Advisor next Tuesday. So we're really excited. It's been something in the works now for quite a while, over the last few months, working really closely with those early adopters and beta customers of ours to shape what the future is going to look like for AI and a strategy execution platform. And so next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we are going to be unveiling Strategy Advisor in much more depth, and we're going to be following that up with more demos and some other content after the fact. But really excited. This has been a journey that when Abby and I first started Elate was everything that we were hoping for, and now it's just coming to, again, this perfect intersection where the technology and what AI is unlocking is really changing the way that chiefs of staff, COOs, chief strategy officers are going about executing their strategy. So we're looking forward to it. Would love to have as many folks as possible join that call next week.
Incredible. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. If you have not heard yet, Ask a Chief of Staff is the go-to resource for chiefs of staffs looking to secure high impact roles and drive results. So we've got a wonderful technical newsletter for all of you, and we also have a private Slack community if any of you are currently looking to get the tactical resources you needed yesterday. If you have any questions regarding the Ask a Chief of Staff community, you can hit me up. My name is Nia Salapari, or you can also hit up Clara Ma as well. We're all happy to help answer any of your questions regarding the community. And I posted in the chat, if you have additional questions for the Elate team, please go ahead and reach out to Chase. I sent his LinkedIn note there. And he also, guess what? He shared the event link for this October 22nd event. So we've shared a ton of information today. So without further ado, happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you so much, Elate team. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.